The January 25th hearing of the Westborough Conservation Commission is now in session. My name is Andy Kenningsberg. I'm the chair of the Westborough Conservation Commission, and I am calling this public meeting to order at 7 p.m. In accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order of March 12, 2020, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, we are conducting this meeting remotely via the Zoom webinar platform. To ensure public access to the deliberations of this meeting, the public may access this meeting live. The remote meeting login information can be found on the Conservation Commission website and is also being displayed currently. I guess we're not doing that at the moment. Can I share my screen? So, okay, Sherry, you're muted. Current.
I'm sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. I can't share my screen right now.
I will share my screen. And that will be this one.
Gordon, you're muted.
Okay, so can people see the, oh, you got it there.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, that was me.
Oh, let me review. Okay. Anyway, where was I? Following each presentation at tonight's meeting, the petitioner and questions from the commission, members of the public will have the opportunity to ask questions, provide public comment. To do so, you can use the chat feature to request to ask a question or make a comment. You can also ask a question or make a comment by emailing conservation@town.westborough.ma.us, and your question or comment will be read into the record on your behalf. Any member of the public wishing to ask a question or make a comment will be asked to identify themselves with their name and address for the record. All video screens will be turned off with the exception of the commissioners, the agent, the current petitioner. Once the commission has acted on the application, the petitioner is free to leave the meeting. Screen sharing will be permitted only for the current petitioner and/or upon the request of the commissioner agent. All votes will be taken by roll call vote. In the event of any technical difficulties, all matters on the agenda that have not been heard will be automatically continued to the February 9th Conservation Commission meeting. At this time, I would like to ask the commissioners to present their names. Okay, Andrew Kenningsberg, Chair. See Gary.
Gary Kessler, Commissioner.
Kelly Marston, Commissioner.
Stephanie Kelly, Commissioner.
Okay, and I don't see anyone else from the board at the moment. So the only item on the agenda is a discussion of stormwork compliance at the Fales Elementary School, 50 Eli Whitney Street. Okay, who is up first? Stephen Theron.
Yes, thank you. Steve Theron, project manager with the Vertex Companies. We're the owner's project manager for the town for this project at the Fales School. I'd like to introduce who else we have here as part of the project team on this call and get started right into the presentation, if that's all right.
Yes.
Okay. With me tonight with Vertex is George McMahon, on-site supervisor. We have, I have to scroll through all the attendees. I know who is here company-wise. Representative Caitlin Osepchuk from HMFH Architects. Stephen Garvin with Semiotis. Semiotis is the civil engineer on the project. Kevin Jones is here from the Gilbane Company. And if there are more in attendance, looks like Tristan Bazant has joined us also from Gilbane. Julie Nugent, also from HMFH. My apologies for not realizing everybody who's here as I see the names pop up. Also Mark Winslow from the Gilbane Companies. We'll get started with this presentation and Caitlin from HMFH will take it from here. Off mute.
Thank you. So I will share my screen. Please let me know if you don't see PowerPoint presentation come up. So a quick run through of the agenda. We will discuss the history of the pond, our SWIP performance regulations and design standards that were submitted, the 3 siltation issues that we have experienced on the Fales site and the corrective measures that have been taken, as well as future corrective measures and proposed corrective measures that we will be taking, and a proposed schedule for the implementation and review of these proposed corrective measures. So our existing site, 50 Eli Whitney Street, the existing Annie E. Fales Elementary School, the new construction of the new Annie E. Fales Elementary School, our steeply sloping site. So this is a scan from the 1963 or 64 civil drawings that we had on file that show the existing Annie E. Fales Elementary School and the drainage lines that run to the existing pond with the current head wall, which is the outlet structure that goes into the pond. Steve Garvin?
Yes, thanks. I want to make sure I was not muted. So again, here's the plan of the submission that went to planning board and is in the documents of what was proposed that met really the stormwater standards of expectation for a typical site. So there's a row of hay bales and silt fence that creates a perimeter system. There is a red construction entrance as you're entering to ensure there is not tracking on and off. And then if you go to the next sheet, Caitlin, it's trickier to see on the site plan, but some of the other erosion measures that were part, as you can see, the silt fence and the wattles, the check dams. We had both stone check dams and they were hay bale check dams in place, and all the catch basins have silt sacks on them to ensure that there is not silt entering into the drainage system itself. The next sheet then illustrates the fine job they did of installing that on site. So you can see multiple rows of straw wattles, straw bales, silt fence, and also the catch basin filters are illustrated with some crushed stone to help control the erosion of what you would expect to see on a typical site. Unfortunately, this has not been a typical site. So maybe Caitlin can go through the original issue of siltation that we ran into and some of the history.
Yep. So the first siltation issue that we experienced happened around May of 2020 when we were excavating the uphill site, which is to the west, the footprint of the new Annie E. Fales. What was happening was any rain event we had, water was washing down the slope. This is the high point of the slope, the low point of the slope. Sorry if I didn't previously state that. So any water that was running down the site, you can see in the image on the left-hand corner of your screen, was picking up this very fine glacial till silt and overwhelming the drainage controls that we had in place. So all of that very fine silt was getting into the existing drainage system, which is highlighted in red on the screen, and funneling through the drains to the head wall at the western portion of the pond. Our initial resolutions were to enhance a lot of the controls that were on site, extra straw wattles, some check dams to slow down the water as it was running down the slope to give it more time to let that extremely fine silt filter out of the water before reaching any of the manholes. We tried diverting the water again to slow it down and direct it away from the manholes. It was still overwhelming the system. The silt was just extremely fine and was finding its way into the drainage system. So we installed a frac tank, which is shown in this, or depicted, diagrammed, this blue rectangle. So the frac tank was installed and actually pumped out water from the drainage system itself, put it into 2 chambers, was treated with a flocculant, which is a additive that essentially makes the silt heavy and filters down to the bottom of the well so that the clean, non-silty water can then be pumped out of the frac tank. And it was pumped into new drainage lines that were installed on site that had an outlet at a new outfall. So the image on the left is actually the frac tank. You can see in the bottom chamber the very silty, murky water that was pumped in, treated with flocculant. And the top chamber is the clean water that no longer has very fine silt in it. And this is the clean water that was then pumped out and let to discharge off of the site. And the image on the right, the 2 mason jars, you can see the silty water on the right, untreated. And the mason jar on the left is water treated with the flocculant. So you can see how it actually gets that really fine silt to settle to the bottom so that we can separate out clean water and silt. The siltation issue number 2 that we ran into, which occurred December of 2020, while drilling for the geothermal wells, which are highlighted with these red dots that I'm circling, the water contained a very fine stone dust. So when the water from the drilling of the geothermal wells was pumped onto the site, it was too fine to filter out and was leaving the site in any of the drainage water. So we again installed frac tanks, 2 frac tanks, to deal with this super fine stone dust that we encountered while drilling the geothermal wells. Same principle as before. The water that has the stone dust in it is pumped into a compartment treated with a flocculant. The stone dust settles and the new clean water is then pumped off-site, and it is pumped directly outside of the site limits so as not to pick up any additional sedimentation. It's purely clean water that then can flow into the pond to the east. And our this third siltation issue that we are dealing with now, the red highlighted area is area that is currently being worked on and is sort of stripped. So glacial till silt is again being picked up in any of the drainage stormwater and is finding its way off the site.
What is it that you're doing there?
In the red area,
Yeah.
we are excavating and drilling for the geothermal wells.
In that entire area? Because I thought the geothermal wells were the red dots that were down towards the right-hand side, bottom corner.
So the geothermal wells that were causing the siltation issue number 2 were highlighted by those red dots. We do have additional geothermal wells, if you can see my mouse.
Oh, all right, yep.
Up to the north portion of the site. Gilbane, do you want to speak to anything else that's going on site up there?
Caitlin, can I, are we asking questions as the speakers present? Are we waiting? Jordan?
It would be best to wait till the presentation's done. Maybe get your questions answered and then we can go through it. Is that okay, Jerry?
I do have a question on this plan, if I could raise it before.
Yes, sure.
I apologize for being late. Caitlin, when I was out there during that January rainstorm a couple of weeks ago, are you saying the red highlighted is the area of exposed soil that's contributing to the erosion?
Correct.
Because I think it should be modified. When I was out there, the existing school, and I don't know how I can explain this to you, but you see the westernmost portion of that red hashed area. If you can bring, yeah, right there. So bring your cursor over to the right. No, the other direction. Now that zone between the school and the red mark, you have some of that embankment covered in red, but that whole side of the embankment was contributing to siltation. There's a pile of silt there. I think there was an attempt to stabilize it with some application of something. But when I was out there along the school, it was ponded water. It was coffee colored, and right adjacent to it was the embankment of that. You can see some of the side slopes, but you haven't covered all of the area in red, and that flowed to the north and then made its way around to that perimeter. Yeah, the one you're showing right now. That was a major contributor, as well as the main area that you focus on. But there was a lot of ponded water there, and it was really flowing pretty freely from that ponded area to the north, hitting that riprap swale, and then flowing along the perimeter, as you pointed out. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of that.
No, I appreciate that, Gerald. So the diagram, as you clearly stated, doesn't quite pull in the exact area that you mentioned, which is right here. So my apologies for that, but you are correct. So all of the slope, we're at a high point. Going down, we do have a swale that is picking up water and that superfine glacial till silt, and traversing, like you said, east along the extents of the site down to our northeasternmost portion of the site.
And I happened to be out there. We had that pretty heavy rainstorm, and I was out there just as it was ending. It was still raining, but it was slowing down, and just as it was ending. So, I had a good look at a lot of the drainage patterns, and that was definitely one of them.
That is an area of concern. Oh, I'm sorry.
Jerry, you also showed picture this coffee colored stuff was running right down along Eli Whitney Street, then into the parking lot and into the that additional outlet, well, both going into the stormwater system and going into the that other check dam and gravel structure that you put in.
Yeah. And I don't know if now is the time to raise a question, but I do. There is a picture, and I do have an observation I just wanted to make. If you go all the way down Eli Whitney Street and turn the corner into Ruggles, and follow Ruggles down to where the wetland is. As soon as you reach the wetland, there's a outlet, a drain that was flowing very heavy that day, a real good flow. And again, that was very coffee colored. And I'm assuming that picks up the catch basins along Eli Whitney and just sends it all the way down to the end of Eli Whitney. It takes a 90-degree turn onto Ruggles, and just that's how the drainage from Eli Whitney, or that portion of Eli Whitney, gets to the wetland. Am I correct in that? Because otherwise, that was a major contributor to siltation and the coffee discharge into the wetland too. I mean, there was a substantial flow from that drain. They daylighted from the road, right into the closest part of the wetland that you come to when you turn onto Ruggles.
Yep. So, hi, this is Kevin Jones from Gilbane. We do believe that there are some catch basins that along Eli Whitney that do turn the corner by Ruggles. We are confident that the one by the entrance to the school is connected to the head wall that goes into the pond from from right where our riffraff is shown, but the concrete head wall. One of our plans, once we get to it, you'll see we're planning to put a camera in the catch basin to see if we can help understand where the infiltration points on the routing is.
But I think we need to confirm and make sure that's the correct drainage pattern. And if it is, on that given day, those basins were, they had a lot of silt in them, and they were just flushing the silt out of the basins down to the discharge point into the wetland.
So I think it's a good time to continue, because I think a lot of the good points that are being brought up here are addressed. Not all, but I think you'll see some of these as the slides go through. We'll start to show more of what you're discussing too.
So we have our short-term resolutions that are outlined on this slide that speak to some drainage control structures that are already installed, some that we are enhancing, some that have been added based on comments from Samiotis, from the Conservation Commission, based on your site visits, and some additional measures that Gilbane has been taking to reestablish some additional controls. So you can look around the site, refresh the stone at the west side road to help filter out any of that silt, refresh the stone check dams to slow down the flow of water to help facilitate that silt filtering out, as well as installing tackifier on either side of the road, which was installed today based on comments from the Conservation Commission, to stabilize any exposed area on the site in that location, inspect, repair, and replace any already installed straw wattles and silt fence around the perimeter of our site, spray all exposed stockpiles with tackifier and coat to a thickness to prevent any erosion runoff in that main area of construction. Install erosion controls around the drilling, straw wattles, silt fences, stone, as well as maintaining the frac tanks. Inspect and clean all silt sacks in road and school parking lot. Tackify the slope and repair any ruts and straw wattles in the previously installed areas, as well as install any straw wattles at all manholes and area drains to this southern portion of the site. So these are all measures that are currently in place or are in the process of being installed and will be finalized shortly if they have not been already. Gilbane has worked tirelessly today with their subcontractor Marois to go around and implement as many of these today as possible.
How long do you expect the tackle fire to last?
That's a good question. I think it all depends on how hard the rain is and how often the events are. What we've seen on site so far, the areas that were sprayed, even after a few rainstorms, you could see that it was still holding it and doing its job. So I think it's just something that, again, we have to constantly review and monitor as events come through.
It says to thickness as well. Could you describe what that means? Apply to thickness, I think it was the term on the plan.
Yeah, that basically just, so I think what that comment is basically in that area, we have done it before. So we want to make sure that when they came through again, to make sure even though the previous application, maybe it was starting to thin or wash out, we wanted them to still come back and hit this again. Some of this language on here is what Gilbane used for directive to our subcontractor. So sorry that the gap of the verbiage doesn't carry over, but basically it's to make sure that we have proper coverage even on previously applied areas.
We do think that, yeah, just to the point, I think that the chair stated that we do think with the colder weather currently that the tack fire will probably hold longer, and without the big rain events we had during that warmer December and early January. So we feel with the coming weather, it should hold up better from that perspective as we continue to bring longer term resolutions in. So sorry, you have another question now.
Yeah, was there any consideration to just applying some poly sheeting on some of these side slopes to help minimize the siltation of the stormwater? I know it's a lot of plastic over, I'm not suggesting every entire area, but you know, you weigh it down, you shingle it, you're not gonna have any contact with water and rain, snow, and snow melt with the underlying silt. And we keep hearing that the materials are very fine, and if we're going to collect it and try and hold it and have it have the silt fall out naturally, the long residence time. I think to the degree that you can try to keep the siltation from you know, getting into the stormwater, you might have more success. So I was just wondering if there was in any key areas, particularly where there's slopes involved, where that tackifier could wash off in a heavy rainstorm pretty easily. You're not going to get any erosion if you drape some poly over. And you know, it doesn't have to be real thick. But
So what we
any thoughts about that?
So what we've seen on site, so the area that Caitlin had represented it as where the geothermal is, that area is constantly being utilized and worked, and they basically are sitting in one spot for 2 days. So that area wasn't really an option to hit with that, with the plastic and for a long term. So the tackifier was doing its job there. On the west side of the site, the top areas above our construction site was all hit with hydro seeding and meadow mix, and that's holding up very well. We reviewed it on site today with Jordan, and it looks not to be, there's no ruts or washout that you could see. The lower area that's represented here is where the loam was stopped, and there was about a 5-foot section right on our access road on the north of the building that had some washout. So what we did is we went back and stabilized that specifically today with that tackifier. But what we've seen is it's performing rather well. We're not seeing many areas where this was utilized, where it was washing out extensively.
I wanted to ask a question about the, where you're doing the geothermal wells. Is the siltation that's accumulating in that area because of the drilling?
So what we're seeing coming directly from the geothermal wells is not the same coffee colored siltation that we're seeing elsewhere on the site. It's more of it's a stone dust from actually drilling through bedrock. So it's slightly different. But because that is an open portion of the site that is currently being worked on, trucks driving over it, it is being excavated, it is generating a small amount of that coffee colored silt that we're seeing.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course. Steve Garvin, do you want to speak to our proposed long-term issues?
Yes. So, thank you. So some of the strategies we're looking at for a long-term resolution stem process, we're trying to work through some of the calculations. One of the things we're looking at is to take the clean water coming off the roof drains and the area immediately outside of that and divert that into a drainage system. So it's not contributing to the flow that's catching anything that's exposed. So we're trying to bring more piping to bring that back and discharge outside of the area that's exposed so that clean water can be moved and not contribute to what we're having. We are reviewing and evaluating the on-site settling basin in various locations with supplemental pumps that will go to the frac tanks with a clean discharge of water. What we're looking to do is try to come up with a solution that will treat about 1.5 inches of a rain event, which is equal to that 1/16 event. That was a significant event. So we're looking to be able to have, between the size of the settling basin and the pump volume, being able to pull it out and put it into a frac tank, to have enough capacity, both from a peak rate and a complete volume perspective. So we hold the water and allow it to settle out between any sort of coagulant or frac, to be able to have the flock come in there also and have it work through the weirs and be able to settle out. We're looking, as mentioned by Kevin, to camera the pipes from the head wall just off the parking lot to the kind of southeast of the site, to make sure that there's no other drainage getting into the drain line, discharging at the pond. There's been small discharges there, so we're looking at ensuring that there's no other way it's getting in from there. Finally, while we don't think it's something that's going to help reduce what's going in, we're looking at maybe putting a turbidity curtain as a final drainage control measure at the edge of the pond to ensure, in case there's a storm event that overwhelms the system, that there's something else there as a final stopping point to help maintain and control what's discharging.
Is that
so
just
we're looking at?
Is that just at the
no? No, that would be actually in the pond itself.
Well, along the entire
On the
shoreline
edge.
there?
Along a portion of the edge where we feel like we've seen where the water has discharged along that way. We're still developing. We're looking at different solutions. I think one of the charges of the commission has been to look at other solutions. So we've done this when we've done work within ponds. So we're looking at where strategically placing this might add another level of defense, a last level of defense for the project itself, being such a unique site.
if I could just make a comment on that, from what I saw during my observation of that rain event, and I don't mean to, squash any of these proposed, because I know you're working real hard at coming up with them, but at that point, what's in the stormwater is the finest material. That turbidity curtain is not going to knock out that the finest material at that point. It's almost, and what I saw on site that during that rain event, a lot of the existing controls were being breached. Water was going around those check dams, over wattles, and just running down. There was some hay bales on that downslope leading to the pond. They were being circumvented as well. When you have a rainstorm like we had that particular day, it's a huge challenge. So you can do that. But personally, I don't think you're going to get anything out of that. I'd rather see more effort being placed up gradient and try to solve the problem there. Particularly as it was pointed out, that the material can be so fine that it's a challenge. So just keep that in mind. Any coffee colored water that makes it down that slope to the pond, that turbidity curtain is not going to be effective.
Yeah,
I don't disagree. I think sometimes there are turbidity curtains that work with fines. We've worked with them in areas that do that. However, we do think attacking at the point, which is what all the main bullets before are talking about, is the way to really improve and create more capacity for the system. And that's what we're looking for, really, is to create more capacity to control what's going from the site during a big storm event.
Okay, two observations. The material here you have the straw wattles, which is supposed to slow down the flow, and the silt fence, the check dams, everything's supposed to slow down the flow, which is great. I see it as catching sand. I see it's catching standard silt. The material that we're dealing with here is rock flour. It's clay sized. It's not clay, but it's clay sized. On its own, it takes about, because I had a sample of it that I bought home, it takes 7 to 10 days for the stuff to settle out. So once it gets picked up, even if it gets slowed down, it's going to go right through all these standard erosion controls. And I know you're trying to do things here, but ultimately what you have to do is protect the slopes, protect all the exposed area, to prevent any kind of erosion, any kind of runoff from exposed slopes. Just putting gravel on the slopes is not enough. So, I was thinking, Jerry's saying polycloth and thinking any kind of geotextile to prevent any runoff from those slopes directly. But that's my observation, because no standard erosion controls are going to work to keep this fine material from flowing down out of the site. And I also want to see what you folks are going to do to prevent runoff, which is pretty obviously coming from the site, but is going down Eli Whitney Street as well. Jerry took pictures of that. What in the plans that you're doing, you're going to prevent that from happening?
Yeah, on that point, Andy, I would expect, and I didn't bring it up because I just thought it would be part of their maintenance, but those catch basins, when we walked it with Jordan on that particular Saturday, I can't remember what day it was, there were socks in the catch basins on Eli Whitney, which was good. But during that rain event, they were full and they weren't doing what they needed to be done. So regular maintenance on those catch basins, daily checking of those socks if need be, whatever it takes, but those are important controls. And it wasn't mentioned, but I'm assuming that that's part of their SWIP, and maybe it needs to be enhanced a little bit with, just more routine cleaning and replacement of those socks that are in there.
Yeah, that is some of the maintenance that we've been going through and doing. And typically we do go through and inspect after the storms and and make sure they're all cleaned out and so forth. But on the last slide, I think that Caitlin had up did show that we were replacing those and getting hay bales and so forth around them. If it wasn't, that is on our plan.
And if I could just, I'm sorry to bring these points up. My goal isn't to dominate this, but also paying attention to weather events. When you know that there's storm events, make sure that someone's walking around and checking that the check dams are in place, the walls are in place, the socks are fresh, so that it can do the maximum possible job for that particular event. And I don't believe, for the event that I took pictures of, the site was ready for that storm.
Yeah, it's all good commentation, and I want to reassure you that we have been doing that. We actually, the site, this last rain event came on a Saturday, and we met on a Thursday with everyone and put all the controls in place on the Friday. The roads were all restoned, the check dams were all reestablished, the hay bales, the silt sacks, everything was freshened up this Friday, the day before the storm happened. As we're all talking about, it's a very, very challenging site.
And it was a challenging storm. I mean, I was out in that. It rained real heavy, and that's why we talked about making enhancements to those check dams and maybe putting some siltation fence on the inside slope. I didn't see that. I think Jordan mentioned that. I didn't see that when I was out there, but again, that's another good measure to any check dam you have on that northern perimeter swale, siltation on the inside of that check dam, weigh it down with heavier stone at the top. It gets clogged, clean it.
Yeah.
And at every check dam down the stretch. Now, when I was out there, those check dams were being breached. So the water flow happened to be going around. So again, just be aware that you really may have to beef up those check dams to make them effective. Otherwise, just having them in place where a storm allows the stormwater to just go around either end is not effective.
Right. Now you mentioned water coming down Eli Whitney. Did you walk up? Could you give us a verbal description of where you saw the water leaving the site?
Well, the very first picture I took that day was I drove by on Ruggles, stopped by the pond, the wetland, and took a look at what the water looked like from that road. And I noticed that there was a culvert that was coming in that would have been on this southeast corner, I think, if my direction is correct, of the wetland. And it was from the road. It was from Ruggles. And I was saying, and it was just pouring out of that pipe, that drain. And it was definitely coffee color, just like upslope. So right. I'm asking myself, where is that coming from? It had to be coming from the catch basins that are along Eli Whitney, I believe.
Right. So were you able to go up the hill on Eli to see how far or where that was exiting from the site? That's my curiosity, because that was a problem early on and it hadn't been a problem for the last 3 to 4 months. And this was the first storm that we've had a breach on that side. So I'm just trying to understand what has changed on that southern side that has led to water or to water.
Well, you know, the check dam at the parking lot, there was, let me back off from that a little bit. I just didn't see a lot of, down on the slope, downslope of where the stone was, there was a lot of water running through that, but it was all below the stone. So you couldn't really see the parking lot draining over land, but you could see it on the downslope end of that whole system. It was pretty good flow there. But I assume that was from the parking lot.
Right. So where I'm like, we experienced, sorry, not to cut you off. We experienced that on the south side of those temporary construction roads early.
Yeah.
So what we had put in, one of the pictures earlier, Caitlin, shows our construction road where we actually put a trench in the road to cut that off. Yeah, right, the far right picture, to try and contain that, because that was one of our issues very early on, and we hadn't seen it over on the south side. So I'm just trying to trace it back.
Yeah, and there's no question, and Andy, we didn't get a chance to talk about it, but the site, the private site up gradient on Eli Whitney, definitely contributing to the siltation.
Okay.
No question. And it could have been just along the gutter on Eli Whitney Street, that did drain that site. I was at the tail end of it, of the rain event, so I couldn't gather. There wasn't a huge flow through that gutter system and the catch basins. But I might have been catching the very end of the discharge of the event at that spot that we were talking about on Ruggles. And by the time I worked my way up, maybe 20 minutes later to see that site, it had stopped raining, and I didn't see a lot. I saw definite signs of runoff coming from that site and a lot of exposed soil. So I knew, during the peak of the event, that site was contributing to it as well.
Well, that's another issue we'll have to take offline.
Yeah.
But it's something I think that can be addressed as well. So.
Andy, if I can just make one comment, Fung Nguyen, who's one of our inspectors in the engineering department, and I met with the owners and construction team at 38 Eli Whitney this morning. That's the site immediately adjacent and to the west. And they did have some weak spots in their erosion control system as well. So they're implementing some additional measures, and we're going to be monitoring that site closely as well. So
okay,
it is
great.
true that, and you can see, all you have to do is walk by and look, because there's, the siltation leaves a trail off the site. So, so I just wanted to make sure that that was said, that we are working with that site too, and it is true that there's an issue there as well.
So you all beat me to our last slide, which opens it up for any questions or comments.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have a question relating to how the flow from the drilling operation is being handled. When we were there, our understanding was that the stuff coming out from the drilling was going into a frac tank, and that clean water was being discharged basically through a flexible pipe off-site downslope. And when we looked at the discharge area, it wasn't discharging at the time, but when we looked at that area off-slope after our site walk, we found a fair amount of evidence that there was silt involved in that flow coming out of that pipe as well, which was unexpected based on what we had understood. So can somebody explain that for me?
And I think you're absolutely accurate. And that was the discussions, and that's our intent. I believe that was one isolated incident where something had happened with the frac tank or the way that their operation was set up. Since then, we have that more on a regular rotation as far as checking to make sure, and the cleaning and the maintenance of the frac tanks maintained. Your observation is accurate, and everything was put in place, and I believe it was just an isolated incident that happened at that location.
Something I noticed when I was out there a week or so ago was that the drainage pipe, I guess is a black flexible tube, about 6 inches in diameter, was in fact going directly off the site. I thought it should have been going into the detention basin, not directly off the site. I didn't realize it was being treated with flocculant in the frac tank, but it didn't seem right to me that it was discharging directly off site, and I wanted to know why. you chose to do that?
That was one of the contributing factors. So when we had started drilling the wells, the first set of wells that we were drilling were relatively dry, not producing a ton of water. When we started to drill the wells in the highlighted area right next adjacent to the frac tank, they were producing 70 to 100 gallons per minute. And with that quantity of water, it was overwhelming every retention area that we possibly had. So that's why we went to the frac tanks to treat it and have it leave as clean water.
So following up just a little bit, would you consider cleaning some of the area downslope from that pipe so that we can monitor it in the future?
Either that, or you could change the location of the discharge point so that it's unimpacted, just to check on it. That's another option.
Yep, that will work.
We can look to do something like that. Absolutely.
Andy, I've got a question. There was a reference made to treating the 1.5 inch storm. And there was a reference to a said basin, and I'm wondering if that's the said basin that's there that we observed at that northeast corner of the site. Is that correct?
That's the only one I saw, other than what was up by the school.
What would if you're going to design for to treat the 1.5 inch storm, and it sounded like through the sedimentation basin, where is that going to be located, and over what area would you have in mind that's going to handle that's going to be routed to that basin for treatment?
So the north and northeast section, we're looking for places to put a settling basin, or maybe a series of settling basins, to create the right volume. And from there, they'd be pumped out to a frac tank. Okay. So it's almost like a reservoir where the flow going in, based on a storm event, would then be sized with the flow going out. And the idea is to really, after a storm, be able to get the water out of the settling basin into the frac tanks to have the capacity to capture the flow if there happens to be a subsequent event. And that the key is to keep the settling basins as the capture and not the treatment, and keep the capacity for that type of event based on the size of the settling basins and the pumps themselves. And then the frac tanks would be sized for that volume, and that is where you treat and discharge.
Are you're gonna have to look at redesigning the downslope edge of that settlement basin, because it was failing. And you're gonna have to do something else besides hay bales and silt fence or straw wattles to
yes, we might have to dig it out. Absolutely. You're right. It definitely needs to be something that'll contain. Again, we're looking at the settling basins to be containing, not necessarily settling. But they're not detention basins. They're going to be a volume to capture and then be able to transmit it to the frac tanks with a pump.
Okay, like I said, you're going to have to redesign the whole edge of that settlement basin on the downslope side of the site, because it was failing in that last storm, the last big storm. Water was just pouring right out of it.
Yeah, we agree.
And I'd be interested to see what portion of the site gets picked up, and its stormwater routed to that point. And I would assume then, unless it's all automated, I would assume during, a particularly heavy rain event, there's going to be people on site making sure that that's operating sufficiently. Would that be part of the plan?
if that's the way we had, where we have to have a pump when it's actively going, I think there's more engineering and thought process has to go into what our sizes are and so forth. But
Understood. And then if I could ask another question on the clean water off the roofs, you said, I like the idea of routing that separately from the entire system, but do you have any thoughts about exactly where you would discharge that? I mean,
so,
go ahead.
So currently, where you look at the northeast side of the site, that is discharging to your right, Caitlin, right above the retention basin. Yeah, right in that area. Currently, it's discharging there and feeding into the retention basin, which is also creating some of the issue. As you know, we're putting more and more roof on. During the last storm, we probably had less than a third of the roof on. Now we probably have less than a third left, probably less than a fifth left. So as the more and more drains get connected, more clean water comes out, we are going to look to extend that out of the catch basin area and discharge past the retention area, because it should be all clean water coming through that pipe. So
there was a outlet there, and Gary, you remember you and I talked? No. There was a drain outlet, just upgradient of the basin, and kind of scratching my head about what the source of that was. So right now you're saying that the roof runoff is going to that basin and mixing with the current stormwater?
Currently, it's running around the outside of the existing building and daylighting right before the retention basin. So yes, right.
And that's in large part because you just haven't made the connections to route that separate from the surface water. Is that right?
So that goes into this retention basin right here in the final design. Unfortunately, there's a lot of work to get in place before we can get that basin in.
Oh yeah, no, I understand that's the final design, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about, during construction, what are you doing with the roof runoff? And frankly, I think you'd be in a lot better shape if you can keep that totally separate from the stormwater.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I must have misunderstood what you're saying. Where it is currently is mixing with the stormwater and going into that retention. Yeah. We are part of our new plan, or our enhanced controls. We are going to extend it past this retention area to get it out of the retention area and daylight it back here where the cursor is, somewhere around there. So that we do have it separate.
What's the volume of flow you're expecting to come out of that during a storm?
We'll have to determine when we know how much of the roof is there, and then the storm event. But yes, we'll calculate the size of the pipe they end up using to bring it around, right? Those will all contribute. So that's all information that's good to know for making sure it's not going to erode at its discharge point.
Exactly. Yeah. I know you've been happy with the way the tackifier has been working to prevent erosion on the slope. Do you have a plan or a schedule for reapplication or reinforcing the coatings? Is there some kind of a specific plan you have for that?
Typically, we review the site before and after each storm event. Right. So we walk the site and we do provide reports of the maintenance that's done before. And then our field superintendent, Tristan, typically emails Jordan after an event or right before an event with an update of where we are with things. So we'll put that on the inspection schedule as well.
Well, if you inspect it and find out that stuff needs to be repaired, how quickly can you get someone out there to do reapplication?
So this time it was 2 days, but I heard that they're not very busy. And this time of year, this is not their busy season. So within 2 days, and I'm sure if we had something that was projected with a heavy storm, we could put them on an all-call basis.
Okay.
And when do you expect all of the changes for this round to be in place?
The round that's represented on the screen here.
Yeah, pretty much all the things we've been talking about.
So there's short, the items represented here are the short terms. These will all be implemented by the end of this week, by the end of 2 days from now. We've done a ton of it already by the west and north side of the building with the spray, the tackifier, and also at the front entrance. They're working to restructure some of the soils down by the geothermal. And once that happens, we're going to spray that area as well. So direct answer is the short-term resolutions this week. The long-term, I think, needs some more engineering time and then some time to implement.
And the discharge for the roof water, extending that so it doesn't go into the basin. When's that going to happen?
So that's relatively small scope of work. We just need to circle back with Stephen and his group to understand what kind of controls we need to put so that we avoid erosion on the roof drain or on that roof water.
And when do you expect to run a camera up the pipes?
We tried to get somebody scheduled. I haven't heard from the contractor on their availability. I hope to have an answer tomorrow or the day after of when they can do it.
I guess when you know when all of these things are going to be in place, it might be useful to notify Jordan that that's been taken care of or when that we expect that to be done. So it sets our expectations for monitoring the site.
Sure, absolutely. I think if you ask Jordan, you'd know that we've been pretty frequent with our communication and giving the updates and so forth. He's been a huge help with us and helping us trying to resolve this, and we've been trying to react and get these things put in place as soon as we can. So absolutely, we'll communicate directly with them.
Thank you.
And I know getting that roof drain separate from the surface runoff is, I think, is critical. That's a huge area. It's contributing to the large flows. And if that's right now, if that continues to combine with the rest of the site stormwater management, when that clean water hits the other structures, it's just suspending any siltation that was accomplished because of the velocities that you're going to experience and just the total flows, and exacerbating the problem. I think you can go a long way to help to minimize the issues by getting that separated as soon as you can, even before the sedimentation basin is ready, is up and functioning.
Absolutely. Let me be a little bit more direct. We have already ordered the material. We already have a plan in place. We just want to make sure that what we are going to execute doesn't create the erosion. That's the only aspect that we need to put in place. But as far as extending and so forth, that's within a day or two.
That's short-term first phase. That's an important piece we're doing right away that we can do right away.
Yes, that's short phase. Sorry if I wasn't clear.
Gilbane has been right on top of doing that right away, and we're working with them to ensure the solution is good at the outlet point also.
Okay. Do you know why you had that large ponding situation between the old school and the exposed soil area, the center of the site? You know why that happened?
Andy, look at the slopes to the west side of that area you're talking about, and it hit where it hits the school. There's a pinch point there.
Well, I'm talking about the east side of the old school. Okay. So where you had, the old school, So you're looking, yeah, where the
Yeah,
cursor is.
yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So look at the northern portion of that right there.
Yeah,
Little pinch point. So water has to build up to get over that. And that's what I observed along
Yeah.
that entire run of the school and coming off that slope. It was all coffee colored and
Yeah.
building up and eventually daylighting and getting to the perimeter of the site into that swale system. So to answer your question, I think that's the reason it kind of pinches there.
okay. Yeah.
I have a question. And if this has been answered before, I apologize for my tardiness coming into the meeting. But how is the drainage, roof drainage, and other drainage from the existing Fales building being handled during this period? Is it still draining as it did before? Has there been any interruption in that? How is that affecting this project?
So that is coming off of the south side of the existing school.
Yes.
And that is coming into yes, right there where this riffraff area is that's currently draining on the side of the parking lot. So on the last event, we did not see heavy erosion or sediment getting down to the pond. So there's two locations right over here. There's one, the concrete head wall, and then this one that's daylighting right by the parking lot.
But if I'm right, when you finish the new building, we'll have more than doubled the non-permeable surface for that whole area. And you're going to have the continuing runoff from the old Fales building while you have so you're routing one in one direction and the other in the other direction, but eventually they end up in the bottom of the pond. So your total runoff from the area is increasing very dramatically, is it not?
During construction, there is an increase in impervious area until the second school comes down. Part of what happens in the meanwhile is you do have the construction of the infiltration systems and other mitigation to help reduce the peak rate leaving site. It's multiple ones that are going in the near future, and part of the building will start to come down, but that is common that you would see that increase during construction. Just in general, obviously having a site that used to be wooded and is bare, right? That creates a bigger runoff amount in your curve number. So that's one of the things you're seeing during construction too. So we're trying to control the erosion and siltation while also routing through. During one of the initial issues, as everyone knows too, there was concern that there was a break, and we were looking at seeing that outlet, and that was a lot of the investigation of looking into what was going on with the existing roof leaders and drainage system to the southwest of the existing school. And there was a lot of investigation at that time to ensure and plug that up. And that's where the frac tanks came in originally for that piece, as an example.
Well, I understand what you're saying. It's a very difficult site, and everybody here understands that. But I don't know how you plan for doubling the impervious surface in a small site like this on a sloped hillside without having some very aggressive ways of controlling the stormwater runoff. And I guess what I'm hearing from all the other members of the Conservation Commission is that we're concerned that you haven't been aggressive enough, perhaps, and that that the result is ending up in the pond below. And I don't know if people have some level of satisfaction with what you've presented. I understand it may be your best effort, but the question is whether it's still going to ameliorate what the problem is. And I mean, I'm still unsettled about it myself. I've heard your answers, and it sounds like we can still expect a lot of problems if we have a wet spring.
Well, we're hoping that we won't have a lot of problems. I think the issue we're seeing is not the amount of runoff, but what's ended up being in the runoff, and that's the silt that's being captured. And I think those are all good points. And, you know, one of the things we seem to be running into here is we solve one problem and then have another one. So, you know, I think this one, as you can see, is touching the entire site. So we are trying to be even more aggressive with solutions. And we hope that these short and long-term solutions will work through the spring. And as the spring comes, a lot more of the site's going to be established. And that's the key, truthfully. The stormwater will work once the site is established. It's this siltation issue that we're dealing with. So as we start to pave, have the roof in place, have vegetation come in, there will be less exposed subsoil that is carrying this silt. And I don't disagree with the chair in describing it. It's almost clay-like. It's very platey, small. You know, silt and clay are the two finest types of soil, and I think it's some combination of what's creating floatables in the runoff currently. So we feel we're able to control the runoff. It's more of what's in the runoff. So we're trying to capture it and bring it to a place we can treat it. And we hope as we keep moving through, we are going to come up with a solution to reduce the amount of exposed area.
So if I heard correctly, the old school roof drains are just daylighting to the old parking lot. Is that what you're saying? Is that correct?
There's a new drainage line that runs underneath the parking lot, and then right where the cursor is, there is multiple check dams and stone and silt fence and hay bales that is oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting a text. So I apologize. That area right there catches the old catch basins in between the schools. The roof from the old school goes to the head wall. So that ties into the head wall. My apologies, I was confusing the two lines.
All right, where those series of check dams are, a couple of times that I've been out there after a rainstorm, I try walking on that gravel, and that gravel, it's like walking on a sponge.
It's quicksand.
Yeah, quicksand, and water's going out right from underneath it. Yeah.
I had the same experience. I was shocked. It looks like there's nothing running overland on top of that stone. But if you go down slope a little bit, there's a very good flow of stormwater that at the time I was out there, and I happened to walk on the stone and I almost sank in. Yeah, because it's super saturated. Yeah. And both times I was out there, both at Christmas and the other storm, was the same thing. So it was a surprise. And also, I do have a picture of the discharge there down slope that we were just talking about.
Yeah, I saw that. Jerry.
And that's coffee colored as well.
Yeah.
To the same degree as every other discharge point heading towards the wetland.
Will there be an employee from the consulting company on site during like rain events that are 1 inch or more? Or is it up to us to monitor it? Like if we know a significant rain event is coming, will there be someone from the consulting company out there?
I don't know.
You're asking for from the construction company or from the engineers? I'm not quite sure just anybody? Is that what you're?
Whoever's in charge of keeping the water and the silt where it's supposed to be.
Okay.
Kelly, that's a good point. So under the SWIP, which is the filing, the ENOI filing with the EPA, there is a monitor. So when there's a storm event coming, that erosion control monitor is to be out there and make sure that the erosion control is doing what it's supposed to be done. It's supposed to do. So that performance standard is monitored by that individual.
So they're there during the entire length of the storm?
They need to be there, I think, within 20 before and after the storm, but I don't think they have to be there during the entire storm. I've never seen a SWIP written quite that way.
Okay.
Is the SWIP, could I ask, is the SWIP going to be formally modified to reflect these changes? Is that how is that the intention of the engineers or contractor who is responsible for the SWIP? I'm just kind of curious procedurally how things are going to continue. SWIPs that I'm familiar with, you know, it's a living document. They get modified as the need fits. And we're talking about a lot of additional changes. And I'm just curious to know if someone's going to modify the SWIP. Because keep in mind that the SWIP, this is still a long construction project. It's going to have to go well through the spring, the summer, and likely the fall.
So the SWIP does, you're right, it's definitely a living document. The SWIP is filed with the NOI by the site operator, and it is upon them to ensure that it accurately represents what they need to do. So I think adding some of these documents to the SWIP makes good sense for the site operator.
Jordan, I think that's something that would benefit the commission to get a copy of when that's done.
Sounds good, Jerry. Thanks.
Is there any possibility of like actually physically cleaning up the silt before a rain event to help prevent such a large volume of it going into the water to begin with?
Sounds like a best practice to me.
That's what I was thought how it was supposed to work.
Kevin, you want to repeat your practice of monitoring that pre and post storms? I think
Yeah.
we did discuss that a little bit already, but do you
Yeah.
want to speak to this?
It is important for everyone to understand that we do go through and upgrade, update, clean out, muck out the controls before a storm is projected. And then also we inspect them after. This last storm, we met with pretty much everybody involved on the project the day, 2-3 days before the storm, and we implemented everything that was talked about. Addressed the road conditions with stone. We updated the check dams. We changed the silt sacks. We mucked out the retention areas. This isn't sediment that's being left behind and then washing out in the storm. This is so fine of sediment that is either working its way free on the slopes and then washing down and picking up momentum and washing out. As we had noted before, there was some washout on the western side that we think that we know we stabilized it with the tack. There are measures put in place before and after each storm.
It sounds to me that the sooner you can get that sedimentation basin modified and enhancements made along that perimeter swale, and get the, as Caitlin described, the flocculation practice started, I think that's going to go a long way to helping minimize. It won't say, completely 100% solve the problem, but minimize the problem so it isn't as severe as it is now. So I'm hoping that you make some quick progress on that. Because I think that's going to be the key.
Appreciating your good point, and we'll be sure to keep the team informed as to progress. Certainly get everybody's attention on this issue and the ongoing challenges, as somebody pointed out, seems to evolve from one issue to another. Here as one is addressed and fully satisfied, and also we'll be sure to continue with good communication with you folks.
Steve, it sounds like you still have some engineering to do with regards to the volumes that you need to handle. Is that correct?
Correct.
Are you planning for a 1-inch event, a 1.5-inch event, a 2-inch event? How's that work?
Want to speak to that, Steve Garvin?
Sure. We are looking at that 1.5-inch event, which is a pretty significant event that happened on January 16th, and looking at available area and how the capture volume relates to the flows coming in to the volume of the frac tanks. So all that will then be worked through so that we can handle a 1.5-inch event, right? Both the peak rates coming in and the total volume generated from the site.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions from the board? Is there anyone who's listening in, or let me just want to get the participants up. Okay, is there anyone from the public who would like to ask questions or speak? Please say, that's the best way we want to do this, Jordan. We haven't had to do it before.
Well, we've received no emails from the public.
Okay.
Attendees do have the ability, I believe, to type in a question in the Q&A function.
Okay. The other thing is, if they click on the participants icon, and then there is, okay, you don't have the raise your hand option here on this particular setting. Yeah, so if you can ask a question in the Q&A, if there's anybody in the public who'd like to ask questions. Okay, I am not seeing anything in the Q&A section at the moment. So with that, hearing nothing else, I thank you folks for coming in and giving us the information, and to please keep us completely in the loop as this whole thing evolves. Okay. I do have one other thing that's just sort of business for the board, is that there is yet another committee that's being formed. It's called the Land Prioritization Committee, as if the Open Space Committee wasn't enough. Mark Silverberg is representing the planning board, and he asked whether I'd be interested in representing from the Concom, since the Concom needs a representative as well. Is anybody else interested in being a representative from the commission on this?
I nominate the chair.
Okay.
Second.
Roll call. Andy Kenningsburg, yes. Tim Buckaloo?
Yes.
Jerry Cushing?
Yes.
Okay, who am I missing? Stephanie Kelly?
Yes.
Justin Lundberg?
Yes.
Gary Kessler?
So I neither heard what this committee is doing nor what you're voting on. Could you tell me what those are?
Well, Shelby probably can tell you better. It's just they're looking at prioritization of land acquisition for the town. You want to unmute yourself, Shelby, and explain it a little bit better?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Andy. Yeah, so it's looking at long-term prioritization of land acquisition.
And what's the motion, Andy?
Whether I should be the representative from the Conservation Commission, unless of course you want to.
No, absolutely. I think Andy Koenigsberg would do a fine job. You can have him, Shelby.
Well, I think that
Gladly taken.
anybody else I missed? Okay. That's it. Thank you everyone for coming. If there's nothing else, Jordan?
Nope, I'll follow up with Kevin tomorrow. I've been taking notes, and I think we'll want to provide the commission with an update at least by the end of the week.
Okay. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
You as well.
Thank you.